Hi, I'm Riya Mehrotra from the Financial Express newspaper. Today we are in the office of Speaking Tiger, an Indian publishing house co-founded by Mr. Ravi Singh. He is a veteran in the publishing industry who has worked with publishing houses like Penguin and Aleph in the past. Today we are going to talk to him about the state of Indian publishing industry. So, a fairly new enterprise with less than a decade in service, and Speaking Tiger has already established its name as one prominent independent publishing house. So, how do you describe the journey, sir?
Well, it's been about roughly 7 years, a little under 7 years since we set up the company. And then our first titles were published about 3 months after we set up the company, and that's because we already had contracts signed up. It's been exciting. It's been satisfying in terms of the books that we've been able to do and the authors that we've been able to work with, and the kind of list we've been able to build. So in that sense, it has been very satisfying. It has been exciting, but there have been challenges. So it's been a journey, I would say, of great satisfaction in terms of the kind of publishing we've done. But it's also been a difficult time, especially these last 2.5 years, because of the pandemic. But even before that, smaller publishers always struggle in a market which is dominated by trends and by larger publishing companies. Some of them behemoths. They're not just large; they are huge. But those are realities that you have to live with. But we've always had the support of our authors to begin with, and that is the most important thing. So we have that asset, and we've actually been able to build that asset. So it's been, as I said, it's overall, I would say it's been pretty good. It keeps us in the business, and I think we'll stay in the business for long, because on balance, it's been good.
You started your career in the mid-90s, I believe. And so, how do you think the state of Indian publishing has changed from then to now?
Well, it's changed dramatically in the last, I would say, about 10 or 12 years. Things were changing even before that. From the mid-90s up until, let's say, the early 2000s, there wasn't a dramatic change. There was small changes that were happening. The size of the market was growing. The number of publishers was also growing. But it was after about 2004, 2005 that all of this changed very dramatically. Many, many more publishers came in. The market increased. The number of books being published went up dramatically. Mass market became a huge, I think, disruptor, but people say that it was a good thing for publishing. In some senses it was, but I think overall my opinion is that it skewed the publishing market in a sense. So lots and lots of people had access to a wide variety of books, and also a large number of books. So it's in that sense that things have changed. But one interesting change that people don't talk about when they say that the size of the market has increased hugely, and what earlier would be a bestseller at, let's say, 5,000 or 10,000 copies, now bestsellers are at least 100,000 or more.
There's a lot of competition when it comes to publishing books. There are big fish in the market, and then there are independent Indian publishing houses also existing parallelly. So, do you think in such an environment it's tough to get books out? How viable is the business?
Well, the business is viable. I mean, which is why there are still so many publishers around. But it is more difficult for small and smaller publishers. But that has always been the case. When you have bigger companies have larger resources, they can also negotiate better terms with the trade. So that advantage still lies with them. It always will lie with them. The smaller publishers, we find ways. You just have to be imaginative about the kind of books that you publish and build a readership. If you're going to publish what the bigger ones are publishing, if that is what you're going to do, then you're never going to be able to compete with them. And in any case, if that is what you want to do, then you stay there. You join a big publishing house, a big MNC, and be there. But yes, it is true that the size of the MNCs is growing bigger because, this is an age of mergers and acquisitions. Penguin Random House is one, very prime example of two very, very large companies coming together and forming this huge behemoth. So that makes things more difficult. But what are you going to do? I mean, these are the realities of the market. You have to live with them. But the dangers of paying huge advances, which is what these large companies and MNCs do, is that you end up, again, doing the same thing, killing diversity, because you have, no matter how big you are, you have only so much resource. And you're going to use 90% of that towards these big ticket authors, which is not just advances, but also in terms of the marketing and the print runs that you do, etc. So a lot of the time and the money is monopolized by these huge stars.
Speaking Tiger has managed to sail through these times, and it's one of the most prominent names in the Indian independent publishing industry list. So, how would you say that Speaking Tiger has grown in terms of numbers, or what's the percentage growth in the last few years, if you'd like to tell us?
Well, in terms of numbers, when we started the first year, which was 2015, we released our first books in February that year, and that year we did 35 or 36 books. And even then, what we had thought was that eventually we will publish 80 to 100. So we have reached that. Like this year, again, we will do 100. The last 2 years, because of the pandemic, it was, any plans that you made couldn't come to fruition because everything, was so difficult then. But just before the pandemic began, in 2019, also we'd done about 100. And this year again, we'll be back. So that's about 80 to 100 is what we will do every year. So that's been the growth in terms of the numbers, and that is where we'll stay. In terms of percentage, but if by that you mean sales, it really is difficult because the last 2 years have been horrible. But if you compare to 2019 and what it is now, I would say we're reasonably happy because, again, as I was saying, the recovery has happened. So we've just, this financial year, it's just ended. And we've actually, we thought that the effects of the pandemic would continue, but things have improved. So our sales have actually been fairly good compared to how bad they were the last 2 years.
So in 2015, in an interview, you had said, and I quote, "A handful of authors are beginning to monopolize the resources, money, time, and energy of the industry." So you agree that rings true even today?
Of course it does. And of course, there were some authors who publicly criticized what I had said, and even in private, they told me how unhappy they were that I had said this, but it is true. But it isn't only them. It isn't the authors necessarily who are doing it. It is the big publishers who do it. They are perhaps more to blame because it's the easiest thing to do, to throw money around and build a list. And that has been dangerous, and people have seen what happens. The closure of one huge, really big publishing company was largely for that reason. I mean, you cannot build a good publishing list, a good list. No matter how good the editors may be, no matter how remarkable their publishing choices may be, but at the end of the day, you're just spending a lot of money, and you have this vacuum cleaner approach, So that never works. At least to my mind, it doesn't work.
So you come from one of the biggest MNCs, which is Penguin, and you worked with Aleph as well, and now you have an independent publishing house. So how would you differentiate between working for Penguin and working in an independent Indian publishing house?
When I joined Penguin in '94, I think, and the Penguin at that time was very different. And then I became publisher in 2005. At that time also, it wasn't, it was still something that I could relate to. And shortly after that, I couldn't relate to that and I left. At that time, really, we didn't think of it, maybe because we were in it, we didn't think of it as this big MNC. It wasn't. We were actually not breaking even. Penguin India did not break even till the early 2000s. There was interesting publishing happening there. We were, to some extent, we were, but not entirely, market-driven publishing. But now, yes, things have changed. They are huge. The resources are huge. The lists are huge, and therefore there are different kinds of books in these lists, because they're huge. So therefore, but there doesn't seem to be any identifiable sensibility driving the publishing. There are a lot of good books. There are a lot of bad books. There are a lot of big names. There are some, new voices. But it's difficult to get a sense of what it is. So the one difference is that, and which is why we are here in independent publishing, is that we want the world also to know what we publish. We want to be sure about why we publish books. Anything goes is not the kind of publishing that we want to do. And also in terms of numbers, we do want to make a profit, but we don't want to make huge profits where you can, this again will sound like a criticism, I'm sorry, but it is true in these huge publishing houses, the salary bills alone, are ridiculous. And you can, at least if you take a really big publishing company, you can run about at least 20 small independents with those resources.
And we have great authors like Nish Tripathi, Devdas Mythology, writing about even the retellings of Hindu mythology, but that's sadly centered only around Hindu mythology.
Yes, and though I would distinguish between the two names that you've taken. I think Devdas does things which are richer. I think there's a lot that is interesting there and original there. And it isn't just about what is going to be popular. And it's, he's not writing masala films, which is also a good thing to do. But I think his kind of writing and what he's doing with mythology is a little different. It isn't the mass market pop, kind of retellings.
In the last few years, children's publishing has gone sea change with regards to the audio push that it's got. So how are you planning to make your children's title more interesting and evolve? How are you evolving?
Well, audio, as I said, the challenge is because we don't have the resources to do our own audio books. But in association with others who do that, we will hopefully be able to do that later. That isn't on our radar immediately. We're not going to start that. But in children's especially, where we used to do about 20 books a year, and we are now going to take that number up to about 30 to 35 a year. Because we see there's an opportunity there in terms of not only the sales, but also in many areas or kinds of writing or books that have not really been tried. So board books is one area. Everybody does board books, but most of them are A for Apple or those kind of board books for really young people.
Yes.
So what we're trying to do is to publish board books, but do things a little different. So for instance, there's a book that we did on animal families for really young people. So where you say, daddy cat, mummy cat on one, and the other, then you'll have ammi mare, bhai horse. So you introduce names. We try to make them Indian kind of, well, not stories, but Indian realities. And in each book, so for another one is Little Cub Says Sorry, because our imprint for children is called Talking Cub. So we have a character called Little Cub who says sorry to his sister whom he's bullied maybe, or he says sorry to somebody he has been unkind to. And then Little Cub says thank you. So those kind of things, to do something differently and just bring in a little sanity also to this, because A for Apple, B for, how long can you keep doing that, just so that they understand their world better and introduce concepts, names, and also diversity. So in one of the books, the character that the talking cup says sorry to, the word for sorry is in Santhali, so I think young people need to know that. And that's again one thing which, another reason why I feel that we really should be doing them in Hindi, because those kind of books should be available in other languages as well.
That's a really interesting way of teaching children good habits.
Yes, good habits. And people say, oh, we don't want to preach to young people, but I say, yes, please do, because good manners is important. So yeah, that's what we try to do.
That would be it from our side. And
Yeah.
thank you so much for your time. It was
Thank
a
you.
pleasure talking to you.
Thank you.